Welcome to Tabadlab's 16th Roundtable. You're usually used to seeing Musharraf Zaidi hosting these roundtables. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Amber Shamsi. I recently joined Tabadlab and I'm head of communications. In my previous life, I was a journalist. And today we're talking about the FATF. In October, there was a very significant plenary session that Pakistan was looking to, all of Pakistan was looking to. And while there were hopes that we would be taken off the grey list, as it's informally known, we have been given a 4-month deadline to complete all the tasks in the 27-point action plan that has been laid out for Pakistan to combat money laundering and counter terrorism financing. So we're going to be talking in this Tabadlab, we're going to be talking about the politics, we're going to talk about the legal aspects, we're also going to be talking about the way forward, which is very important because one of the important questions here has been, can Pakistan meet the race keep in the race and meet the deadline? We have 4 months to demonstrate that we can comply. And is that enough time? And what can Pakistan do to demonstrate compliance as well? We have a fabulous panel with us to discuss all these aspects, whether it's from an economic point of view, whether it's from the legal point of view, or whether it's from the political point of view. And when I say political, it's domestic, regional, and also broadly international, in particular with the US. Now that the US has had its elections, there's a new president in town as well. Let me introduce my guests, and we have with us Safiya Ghori-Ahmad, who is South Asia Director for McLarty Associates. She's written, she's very familiar with the area as a South Asia expert. She's also written about FATF in Pakistan. We have Jamal Aziz, who's the Executive Director of the Research Society of International Law. The RSIL has also just published a very detailed paper on how Pakistan has complied, the laws that have been enacted, and what perhaps could be the way forward for Pakistan. We have Ehsan Malik, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Pakistan Business Council, and Ehsan Malik will be talking to us about the sort of business and financial implications of both the inclusion on the grey list and compliance as well. Does regulation affect business? We also have Kateryna Boguslavska, who's the project manager of the Basel Institute on Governance, and she's also written extensively about and understands what the FATF means, and maybe many people don't, but and how compliance can be demonstrated. We also have Dr. Aliya Ehsan, who's the ex-dean of social sciences at the Quaid-e-Azam University, international relations expert, as well as economics as well. So thank you so much for giving us time. And Safiya, I'd like to start with you first, because right now, while we talk about the background, what Pakistan has done and what Pakistan could do next, one of the big questions in Pakistan at the moment is, and it's been discussed for the last week, it's just been all over the news, is obviously the US elections. And we have a new president, the president-elect Joe Biden. Does a Democrat, does a Biden administration, will it look differently at Pakistan and the FATF compared to the Trump administration?
Thanks, Amber. I think really what Joe Biden, Vice President-elect Joe Biden, is no stranger to Pakistan. He, in his tenure in the U.S. Senate, he's been to Pakistan, he's worked on Pakistan, he's been no stranger to the region. So, I think that the line will continue to be, and I think the U.S. position will continue to be, that Pakistan should remain steadfast in combating terrorism, should remain and push forward for efforts for transparent efforts on financial transactions, and should show the international community that it's ready to sort of support fraud protection, combat anti-money laundering, and counterterrorism efforts. I think that's going to be the U.S. position, through any administration. And I think you're going to hear that from Vice President Biden, from President-elect Biden now, and from his administration. I think you're going to continue to sort of see that message be pushed. And I think oftentimes, people wonder whether politics will play a part of this. And I think that line, since my time and tenure in the U.S. government, the U.S. government has remained, during that time when I was in 2010 working in the State Department, I think the position was was pushing and trying to support Pakistan towards those efforts. So I do think that there will continue to be that sort of push from the U.S. government towards Pakistan.
So the push will continue, but the push has changed as well. Jamal, if I could bring you into this conversation, because one of the, and we were last included on the grey list of the FATF, or in Pakistan as it's called, because it's entered the vernacular. It's been discussed. It's been central actually to the new government, and it's shown a great deal of political commitment as well, and in terms of getting Pakistan off the grey list. But this is not the first time. Pakistan was included on the grey list in 2012 as well. What's changed? Pakistan got off the grey list in 2015 and then was included again. What happened?
I think the Financial Action Task Force, from an international law perspective, represents a fascinating study of the evolution of international law. It is definitely a new form of global governance, one which has, in my opinion, a lot of promise as well, if it is utilized and leveraged effectively. I think when we were grey listed in the earlier times, once in around 2008 and the second time around 2012, back then FATF itself, its processes were not as, they had not evolved to the extent that they have today. FATF's evaluations are getting better. It is evolving in line with experimentalist governance generally as well. So back then, FATF's requirements were simpler. They required Pakistan to comply more on the technical side. So back when we were first grey listed, for example, we never had a law on anti-money laundering. It was an ordinance which had lapsed. They needed a law to be passed. They wanted, we didn't have a financial monitoring unit, and these kind of technical things were missing. And the second time when we were grey listed, it was again broadly to do with technical compliance. Again, there were deficiencies in our offenses, for example, relating to terrorism financing. At this time also, while we were largely non-compliant on a lot of technical points, but broadly, in my assessment, it was because we were not demonstrating effectiveness. Our systems, our processes were not effective. The laws and regulations had technical issues in them, but broadly speaking, the mechanisms were not operating the way they should be in a country which has solid processes. So this time it's all about that, and that's why it has required a whole of government approach across sectors, from banking and insurance to law enforcement to regulation. And that's why this time in particular, it represents such a unique challenge.
So one of the things that you wrote in your report as well, Jamal, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit, and is the fact that, I'm just quoting here, is that, as you said, it's highly technical and that it's evolving. So obviously it's been a whole of government approach. It's been much more stringent this time. There's been task forces. There's been about 15 laws enacted in just this year alone in order to comply with FATF as well. But one of the things that you've written in your report is that it is difficult to find an objective public source of information and analysis. So there's also a perception that the FATF countries that are included on the grey list, there's a lack of transparency in the entire process. Do you find that to be true?
Well, yes and no. I think FATF has been improving its processes, all of its documentation and the way it evaluates countries. It is publicly available information. I think the lack of capacity is more on the Pakistani side, on our side, in our ability to anticipate, comprehend, and respond to this phenomena of FATF grey listing. And that you can see by our initial response as well. When we were grey listed in June 2018, it was mostly followed by a crackdown, on a law enforcement crackdown on properties and confiscating, as if that by itself would be enough to get off the grey list. So it was, I think, the mutual evaluation report, once you read that, we get a good sense that at the highest level, our state institutions did not at that point understand the specific ML and TF risk emanating out of Pakistan. And I think just adding on, because FATF is so technical, there is in Pakistan, its implementation, as I see in the past 2 years I've been working in this area, the implementation is happening mostly in silos across government. And there's only a small core policy group that is in the know about everything, about the bigger picture, but broadly implementation is happening in silos. And when you couple that in with a limited academic culture and engagement by civil society on this issue, uh, then you add that with the political exploitation that has taken place. I mean, you've seen the government rely heavily on multiple bills and labeling them as FATF related legislation, and anti-government forces branding, using it as a convenient tool as well. So there's been a lot of opacity, and a lot needs to be done to clarify what it means.
Dr. Aliya, if I could bring you into this conversation, do you think the opacity that Jamal is talking about is that more to do with the Financial Action Task Force as an intergovernmental body in the way it operates, or do you think it is the Pakistani government that's failed to be transparent in terms of its actions? Dr. Aliya?
Amber, are you addressing me? Because
yes.
My connection is not very good, so I was not able to hear.
So the question here is, the lack of transparency.
Yeah, I'll just expand on the economic profile of the whole FATF setup. And as Mr. Jamal Aziz has also explained, that technical compliance of money laundering and terror financing risks associated with various sectors and with various organizations. And the government has set up the extensive multi-agency process monitor these risks. But Pakistan, you must realize, has a very large informal economy, and many sectors are out of the financial regulatory system that is required for technical compliance of the FATF recommendations. So more financial inclusion and financial regulation of the unregulated sector is required. And let me just highlight some of the sectors that are under this umbrella. And for example, the real estate sector, it's huge in Pakistan and it's all formal. Then there is this concept of designated non-financial business professions and non-financial businesses and professions, which includes the legal professions, the accountants' professions, who have to be supervised, financially regulated. So what I'm trying to say is that understanding the true economic implications of the compliance and non-compliance requires a very deep understanding of how the risks are being across various sectors and across. For example, the non-profit organizations, especially the registered charities, they are supposed to be very vulnerable and risk-prone, and they're not under any sort of technical compliance at the moment. So we have to work on that. Then the APG has also pointed out the Central Directorate of Savings as services of Pakistan. So we still have to work on a lot of fronts to bring all these sectors under a financially compliant mechanism.
All right. So you've outlined how many sectors and how this impacts everything, whether as you mentioned, whether it's lawyers, whether it's the jewelry business, whether it's Hawala Hundi, for instance. But I want to go back to this question of evaluation as well. And I think, Kateryna, if you could answer this question, and you've also written a piece in terms of the mutual evaluation report as well. it includes on-site evaluation. Now, the question is, I think the last time that there was an on-site evaluation was October 2018. Given the COVID-19 and travel, is it fair actually for Pakistan to be evaluated without another on-site evaluation, given the significance and importance of being taken off the grey list? Kateryna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So my question here is the last time that there was a mutual evaluation report and an on-site evaluation was way back in October 2018, the year that we were included on the grey list. The question is, given how important this is for Pakistan as well, is it really fair for Pakistan to be evaluated without another on-site evaluation? What's the process here?
The process for Pakistan is the same for all other countries assessed with FATF fourth round evaluation report. Indeed, the first mutual evaluation report, according to the fourth round methodology, which assessed both effectiveness and technical compliance, was conducted for Pakistan in October 2019. But in September 2020, Pakistan had the first follow-up report where it demonstrated only one improvement in technical compliance. As all other countries, Pakistan has all the opportunities to improve technical compliance and to show this progress with the next follow-up report. As related to evaluation and follow-up on immediate outcomes, this re-evaluation will be done only in 5 years. So where the progress could be seen and could be showed is with technical compliance. And here Pakistan can do a lot to improve. If we look in the overall performance of Pakistan, even with the technical compliance, meaning legal framework in the country, we see that with 4 recommendations, Pakistan is absolutely non-compliant, and this relates to a non-banking professional, CDD, transparency of beneficial ownership, freezing and confiscation, and regulating and supervision of non-banking professionals. We can see that the only 2 high points where Pakistan is showing good results, and the highest point in school it will be A, is with financial institution secrecy laws and financial intelligence units in Pakistan. For the grade B and C, in total, there will be 34 recommendations where Pakistan can do much better and to show improvement in the scores. That probably is the task for the country, which goes beyond the grey list and beyond being out of the grey list, because doing better in both technical performance and effectiveness will ensure long-term perspectives for the Pakistan, and probably will secure the country not to get back to the grey list in case it is delisted in the nearest time. So it is the way to work on structural reforms and being compliant and effective.
All right, thank you. I think that really sort of helps us understand as well what the process is. Well, Safiya, if I could bring you back into the conversation, because we do want to understand the politics of this. And as you pointed out, that Joe Biden, President-elect or Vice President Joe Biden, is very familiar with Pakistan, and as you know, we know about the Kerry Lugar bill as well. He's one of the co-authors. The question here is, I mean, because for Pakistan, there is an understanding that we are in an IMF program, for instance. We need to get off the grey list in order to open up for investment opportunities as well. How influential is the US in terms of whether it is the IMF or whether it is FATF? I mean, are they interlinked? Because there's a lot of conspiracy theories as well.
Yeah, I think conspiracy theories, setting aside conspiracy theories, the US and other geopolitical players, European countries, others are involved. FATF members are involved in the conversations on who should be nominated to be on the gray list. And I think, I think President-elect Biden, I can't speak on behalf of his team or on the US government or other governments, but I think there is a serious concern about transparency and counterterrorism and financial transparency. And I think you see that as Pakistan looks to really attract foreign investors. And you mentioned this a little bit, when you were raising your question. And I think Pakistan's status on FATF on the gray list inevitably impacts the country's ability to attract foreign investors. And I can speak in my capacity in the private sector. In the current economic climate, in this pandemic, there's serious barriers to economic growth more broadly, more globally, beyond just the gray list. But the status for Pakistan impacts imports, exports, it impacts remittances, it impacts its ability to borrow money from international lenders such as IMF and ADB. But more specifically, COVID-19 has forced businesses to support remittances and e-commerce because online systems are really the way business models are operating right now, because we can't operate in person in many ways. And so for Pakistan to be kind of out of the mix and out of the conversation in that way, because the digital offerings require mechanisms that support fraud protection and anti-money laundering and counterterrorism efforts, that in many ways the U.S. government and by default, U.S. companies believe that Pakistan, as they continue to remain on the gray list, is not in compliance with. You're seeing U.S. companies and that question mark, right? As U.S. companies are looking to kind of to look at Pakistan as an investment destination, and so I do think that the U.S. government's position on this could be a factor in moving forward. And I don't think the U.S. government has any ulterior motive in trying to keep Pakistan on any list. But I do think that the U.S. government does want Pakistan to do more on counterterrorism efforts and on pushing for countering terrorism financing across borders and whatnot.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Ehsan Malik into the conversation, because the financial implications are very significant, and the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and the government has attached a lot of significance to getting off the grey list, just in terms of the financial and economic implications as well. But there's another question to be asked. So what Safiya's already outlined the dangers of remaining on the grey list, because we need to attract foreign investors, we need remittances. There is a pandemic and it's affecting everybody globally. But there's another question that I have for you, Mr. Malik, which is really regulation is great, and demonstrating regulation is great in terms of money laundering or countering financial terrorism. But Pakistan is largely it's composed or comprised of the black economy, informal economy. Does regulation or tighter regulation also impact that informal economy? Does it affect business negatively too? So how do we find that balance?
Okay, so I apologize. I don't think I got your first question, so I'm not quite sure in what context you're asking this present question. But let me have a go at this. Pakistan's economy, half of the economy is in the informal sector. So clearly, any limitations on that has two repercussions. One is, of course, the people who directly benefit from that informal economy do get affected. But I think more positively, the formal economy gets impacted to the extent that remittances, for example, have now started coming through official channels. Hawala gets stopped, smuggling goes down, under-invoicing goes down. So all these malpractices are fed by Hawala and the non-banking remittances. So any improvement that FATF can bring, or compliance with FATF can bring, would be hugely positive in the medium to long run. In the short run, obviously, the informal sector does suffer, and informal sector does employ a significant number of people. But I think, from a national point of view and from a sustainability point of view, we should really be looking at medium to long term. So I think the best news that the formal sector could get is Pakistan to comply as quickly as possible with the FATF requirements.
So in the short term, perhaps damage to the informal economy, the benefits are greater in terms of the long term. Dr. Aliya, if I could get your take on this. I think that because her internet lags a little. I'm just going to repeat the question. We have to try and find a balance as well, Dr. Aliya, between the informal and the formal economy, and also just regulation and how it impacts, because this is a very delicate business as well. Dr. Aliya, can you hear me?
Can I possibly respond to that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So in my opinion, look, one consequence that any control over on Hawala, etc., is to limit the scope of the informal economy. Sure. But I think, as I mentioned, the other positive, I think, outweighs that in two ways. One is that the formal sector grows, and the rate at which the economy informalizes slows down. And the other one is that the government of Pakistan is able to get much more tax revenue, which obviously they can't from the informal economy. So what Pakistan badly needs today is significantly higher investment in social development. So that's a huge positive that comes through as a result of compliance with FATF.
All right. Thank you for your input on that. Just in terms of compliance, I'd like to go back to Jamal now, because I think we've passed a number of laws, but now we have to demonstrate implementation, and we have 4 months to do that. What do we have to show to the FATF? What will we have to show to the FATF come February, when we have our next evaluation and assessment? Jamal, I think. All right, Jamal. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to repeat yourself, because you haven't unmuted your mic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I was wondering
Sorry about that.
I was wondering if that was just a glitch in our end, and then I realized your mic was muted. Perhaps a little late, but still, if you could just repeat yourself.
Okay. I just repeat. So generally, I was saying that we have to see Pakistan's response in a broader context, a broader lens. When we were grey listed in June 2018, like I mentioned, our initial response was more of a law enforcement nature. We thought that we could do law enforcement operations, and that maybe would be it. But slowly and surely, government key ministries such as the Foreign Office, or authorities such as the National Counterterrorism Authority, State Bank of Pakistan, SECP, they stepped up and they started developing guidelines and regulations for general implementation of our obligations on AML CFT. You have to realize that Pakistan is a country that is traditionally weak in international law. I've been working in this space for more than a decade now. My firm has been working for more than 30 years in this. we were structurally weak in complying with key UNSC resolutions such as 1267 and 1373, and that required changes across the board, across the country. Now, slowly fast forward to today. Over this process, I think Kateryna mentioned that the latest follow-up report still notes that we are only compliant on one. But the latest follow-up report is based on data taken until February 2020, not September 2020. So between February and now, we have passed 15 laws which have primarily aimed at technical compliance, especially targeting DNFPVs, the regulations, which means lawyers, jewelers, accountants, real estate agents. We have created mechanisms for freezing and seizing in a much more effective and a much more institutionalized way. UNSC resolutions can now be implemented domestically under the Anti-Terrorism Act, and a range of other issues that I don't have the time for right now. But broadly speaking, my answer would be that we are showing compliance. It will now demonstrating effectiveness. I don't think 4 months is a realistic timeline, because the problems which face Pakistan are based on our antiquated criminal justice system, which requires a generational effort at reform. So I see FATF as a silver lining, that it is forcing us to upgrade our entire state machinery. Demonstrating compliance, yes, we will show we are on the path towards demonstrating compliance, but if you expect the system to magically start showing Western standards of results within 4 months, I think that is completely unrealistic. I think that also, in fact, the danger is we are over-regulating, and there is a lack of consensus-based legislation. I mean, the lawyers, accountants, and real estate jewelers, they don't know that they have been regulated, whereas a law has been passed in Parliament. The effects of this are going to come out in the next 6 months. When they find out that they have fallen under the ambit of the law without being consulted, there are going to be strikes, there is going to be unrest, there's going to be a choking down of the economy. So we need to have a kind of process in which FATF doesn't require us to overregulate. FATF is saying, take a risk-based approach. Don't overregulate, identify risks and target it. Whereas we are taking a hammer approach right now. In getting off the grey list, we are passing a wide gamut of laws which will have pretty significant impact on our economy and our general law enforcement as well.
All right, I think you've sounded the alarm on that one, Jamal. Dr. Aliya, I'd like to get your take on this. I hope that you can hear us, because while Ehsan, Malik has said that this is good in the long term, it's good in the medium term, it'll sort of formalize the informal economy, or at least bring it into the fold, and it will be great for the government because, taxes. But there will be a reaction. I think not everybody has understood the passage of all these laws. Dr. Aliya's internet, I think, is failing us a little bit, but I hope she can get back to us on that. Meanwhile, I think there's another point that you raised, really important, Jamal, which was about 4 months not being enough. Kateryna, could I get your take on that? Given that after the October plenary, the comments that came in were there's still some serious deficiencies, and those are in terms of implementation. Implementation can be demonstrated in the long term. Perhaps 4 months is not enough.
I would here distinguish between two main tasks and two main documents. The first one is the document and requirements from FATF to Pakistan for being delisted from the grey list. And these requirements are quite clear. They are now public on the FATF website, and they include the following. First, identification, investigation, and prosecution of terrorist finance activities. Second, sanctioning terrorist finance activities. And third, enforcement against terrorist financing violations, including NPO sector. This is the tasks to be done in the following months. I don't think that it is realistic to expect that the country has to show progress according to all 40 technical recommendations or 11 immediate outcomes in this short period of time. It is more about this detailed point related to terrorist financings where the country has to deliver. When it is about more structural approach and mutual evaluation report and follow-up report, it is a long-term perspective, and there no one is expecting to get very fast results.
Okay, so we don't have to show it across the board. There's a lot that we have to work with. Dr. Aliya, if you can hear me, I would really like to talk to you about regulation. While we have Mr. Malik saying that regulation is good, and I think that is my internet. My electricity is gone, and this is another problem that happens in Pakistan. I think Dr. Aliya's internet is gone as well. Ehsan, Malik, if you could weigh in on what Jamal said, because while you had said that this is a good thing, Jamal says no, over-regulation might lead to reaction.
Okay, so when I say it's a good thing, I'm talking of the direction in which we're going. Obviously, there are steps that have been taken to regulate. It's going to take a while. I mean, first of all, even if you move away from FATF and you look at all the other spectrum of laws that we have, I'm sure we will all recognize that a lot of them are not implemented to the full satisfaction of anyone, right? So it is unrealistic to expect that these laws that have just recently been enacted, which have not been widely, there's not been adequate awareness, propagation of what has happened, let alone training on to people who are supposed to comply with these laws. So yes, there will be but what was the alternative? There was no alternative but to bring in these laws, and I feel that Pakistan would have to try and get more time to demonstrate their implementation. I think it's unrealistic from both sides, from the people who are trying to enforce the laws and people who expect the laws to be enforced, for that to happen in the short while that we have to the next review.
Okay, do you think 4 months is enough?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think 4 months is enough either? All right, Safiya, I think the Pakistanis are saying 4 months is clearly not enough. Kateryna agrees as well.
No, I agree 4 months is not enough, but this is not a new conversation in terms of, talking about demonstrating the strength of law enforcement agencies and strengthening the capacity to identify and investigate terrorism financing activities. This is not a new phenomenon. We've been having these conversations. I think the Pakistani government has been trying to enforce these conversations and try to implement these actions for many years. And so I would maybe push back a little bit and say that, well, 4 months isn't enough time to implement real meaningful change. I do think that this isn't sort of some new concept, a new conversation.
But given that there've been sort of 15 laws that we've passed, they go really across the board, bringing all institutions and regulatory bodies and authorities on board, which includes the counterterrorism agency, which includes, the FBR, which includes everything. Do you think, Dr. Aliya, this is a question for you. Is she on? She's not online. I keep trying to reach out to her, but I think just the internet has been extremely unreliable. Dr. Aliya, can you hear me? Let's just check in. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if she can.
Couldn't
Yes.
hear the question.
So the internet is obviously lagging a little, but I'll just ask the question. Is 4 months enough?
Sorry, I really didn't get it. Let me just speak about some of the positive measures that Pakistan has showcase for technical compliance. the COVID scenario, the controls that were put in place regarding electronic identity and transaction limits greatly helped Pakistan deliver some very important cash relief for social protection. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of room for reform which would ultimately benefit the people of Pakistan also and improve the productivity and the economic competitiveness of Pakistan. So I think I would like to view this as a big opportunity for carrying needed economic trying to undertake
Yeah, I'm afraid the lag has been too great. We caught a little bit of what Dr. Aliya was trying to say, but okay. So given that 4 months is not enough, let's talk a little more about specifics as well. Kateryna, if you could talk to us about because when we talk about demonstrating compliance, this also is in terms of compliance, we have to show how the courts are operating as well. We know that the Pakistani justice system is slow, old-fashioned, creaky. How would we specifically need to demonstrate compliance?
First, as I've already mentioned, if we talk about the task for being delisted from FATF is about demonstrating results in terrorist financing, prosecution, and investigation. I think this is one of the most important. If we talk about long-term improvement of the country, there are two as have already been mentioned, two areas. It's about effectiveness and about compliance. And if we compare Pakistan with other countries currently being also in the grey list, we can see very similar scores and performances. For example, Uganda, that is in the list, has 0 performance in effectiveness. Myanmar, Pakistan, they have 3%. Botswana has 6%, Zimbabwe also 6%. I would say that it's very low numbers because the highest performance demonstrated by countries is 70% in effectiveness. So if we compare with current 3% with Pakistan, is rather low result. So also if we look at technical compliance and performance in technical compliance, we see the similar trend that the performance of Pakistan is close to other countries that are also in the grey list. So Pakistan has performance 41%, Uganda is 47%, Botswana 50%. And here we have the maximum scores performed is 89% in technical compliance. So what I'm saying, it's for sure a very difficult and long-term task to improve both framework of AML safety in the country and effectiveness performance. But there is a way to go, and there are specific recommendations in the report, mutual evaluation report, where the most difficult issues are listed and the recommendations are given to the country on how to work forward.
What can we learn from success stories? And Jamal, I'll come to you as well on that question. Kateryna, if you could talk to us about success stories where countries that have successfully gotten off the grey list, given these much more stringent and holistic measures to counter terrorism financing and money laundering.
I would say it's quite difficult to find examples similar to Pakistan in the grey list. We know that the recent decision was about Iceland and Mongolia that were excluded from the list, but they didn't have any terrorist financing issues. Currently, we have Botswana, Uganda, Mauritius, and Jamaica that plus to AML deficiencies. They have also required to improve their terrorist financing, counter-terrorist financing in their countries. We talk about Botswana and Uganda that had to improve investigations and prosecutions of terrorist financing as much as Pakistan. And we are talking about Uganda, Mauritius, and Jamaica. These countries have to add additional measures to prevent abuses of NPO sector for terrorist financing purposes. So I would say that we have 5 countries to follow and to see their progress, because their progress and their way will be comparable with Pakistan.
All right, so we can't really quite make a comparison, but Jamal, let's talk about the points that are left on the 27-point action plan. So I have a few of them in front of me. If you could talk us through them. So for instance, the country will have to prioritize effective domestic cooperation between the Financial Monitoring Unit and law enforcement agencies in investigation of terror financing. How do we demonstrate implementation on that?
So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. First of all, I think that just clarifying on an earlier point, I don't think that generally our grey listing by itself was a bad thing. Like I mentioned, there was a silver lining to it, because no doubt our institutions and our systems were not operating the way they should have been. And this grey listing has given, if nothing else, the political appetite for structured across-the-board reform of our criminal justice processes, our institutions, and the laws, regulations, and their capacity, which will yield excellent dividends for Pakistan generally as well in the long term. Now, as far as what is left to be done, I think the simple thing is the focus now is on terrorism financing. It's not as much on our anti-money laundering regime as it is on terrorism financing. And when it comes to terrorism financing, there's only been 2 lists which have ever mattered. There's the UNSC 1267 list, which is the global sanctions list for terrorists. And then there are your broad obligations under UNSC 1373, which is implemented in Pakistan by the Anti-Terrorism Act. So basically, in simple terms, they want us to take actions against proscribed organizations, whether under our domestic law or whether under international lists as well. Now, in this front, I think that in 4 months, Pakistan can show and will show progress, because I've worked firsthand with justice sector actors on this for the past 2 years. Our police, prosecution, and judges have developed capacity in understanding in what these laws are. For 20 years, no one ever utilized these provisions of the ATA or the AMLA, etc. Now, the powers have been given, these laws are being utilized. You will see many more cases being registered, many more prosecutions taking place. FATF cannot require us to ensure convictions. That would be against due process. But we have to give conviction the best chance possible. And that is given by laws which allow for things such as the use of interception or surveillance data or undercover operations. Basically, anything which reduces our reliance on witness testimony, which has been a key weak link in our criminal justice system in Pakistan, because we do not have adequate witness protection measures. So we now have mechanisms for mutual legal assistance, for utilizing suspicious transaction reports. Things have become integrated. So definitely you will see improved performance by these agencies in the coming years. But from a broader political point, you should also expect engagement with the US and other countries to change, because now Pakistan will understand what is meant by 1267 and 1373. And my prediction is that you will see a kind of a pushback as well. For example, the Afghan peace deal is seeing thousands of people being released under that deal potentially, which will have grave impact on the implementation of 1267 and 1373 obligations on Pakistan. So that is a point which needs to be raised with the US as well. You will see a different narrative developing, which you are seeing our national security advisor taking vis-a-vis the region as well. So we are developing capacity in this field, and I think that Pakistan, there's tremendous potential for FATF generally as a tool for global governance. I think it's a success story. It is making us do what other measures could not do, and it was ultimately, I think it is for the benefit of all concerned.
Of all concerned, and perhaps I think one of the things that's really emerged from this is that we perhaps should have done this earlier, and it needed the FATF to get us to do this. Safiya, if I could talk to you, because Jamal talked about Afghanistan and the peace process, and given that there was there was a lot of cooperation in terms of Pakistan and the US, but that was again under the previous administration, under another regime. There have been a number of Taliban ex-fighters who were also released from prison as well. How do you see this having a bearing on FATF, on the relationship, and how obviously it's a much broader relationship, but if we bring in Afghanistan into this as well, into the mix?
So yeah, I mean, I think the U.S. has been pushing for a peace process and for conversations and to bring the Taliban and for other players to be a part of the dialogue for 10 years now. I think you have seen progress since in the last few years during this previous administration. I think the next administration is going to try to continue and mobilize and use that momentum to continue conversations with Afghanistan. To sort of push for the Taliban to be brought back into the fold and to have those conversations. I think you're going to see a criteria being put for negotiations that may be more stringent, that I'm hopeful for as a part of those conversations. But I do think Jamal is right in saying that there could be potential implications for how these issues impact Pakistan and FATF. And I think that having the right legal tools in place is absolutely the right outcome for Pakistan to be able to push back and say, look, this is the whole reason why we're implementing these laws so that we can use them.
If we could now, Ehsan, Malik, if you could give your final thoughts. We know that getting off the grey list is ideal. Do you think it's likely?
I personally don't think it's likely in 4 months. I think there will be more time given, and I think that's a realistic way of looking at it from both sides. Eventually, we will get off. The alternative of going to a blacklist, I don't think exists immediately, but that could, in the worst case, have very dire consequences, particularly if correspondent banking comes to a halt and your imports and exports are stopped. We don't really have adequate storage facilities to stockpile. There are no routes. More than 50% of our exports go to the United States of America and Europe, and they are likely, obviously, to be affected. So I think overall, I think both the buyers and the sellers realize this, and so I personally think that Pakistan is going to do its best to come as close as possible to trying to get off, but probably it will not achieve it in the time period.
So obviously, the worst case scenario we've always considered is the blacklist. It has been very, very, very unlikely. But remaining on the grey list, which sector, which area do you think it will impact the most? Because we keep talking about remittances and exports and imports, and also international lenders as well.
Okay, so in my opinion, the grey list has been factored into the business arrangements already. I don't think there's going to be any further negative impact if, for example, Pakistan was to stay on the grey list for another period of whatever 3 or 4 months, longer than currently. All the banks have already screened their counterparts, and they've come to a conclusion that they are fit to be dealt with. Most of the key buyers and sellers have done the same. So I personally don't think that there's going to be any significant additional negative impact. There will be a gradual positive impact even if we do stay on the grey list. because I have a feeling that hawala is gone or almost gone. And if hawala goes, then your smuggling and your under-invoicing, etc., they decline sharply.
So have you seen an immediate effect? It has just been a few months, really. But has there have you already started noticing these effects? As you said, businesses have factored in being on the grey list. That's already a story that's 2 years old. But given these changes, can we quantify these changes in terms of business?
Okay. Not so much directly the business, but obviously the banking is part of business. They have hugely benefited by the curtailment of hawala, remittances. So they are now, all these remittances that are coming in at record levels. Some of it is obviously because of returning Pakistanis, but some element of that is also because of the formalization of the remittance system. So business in that respect has benefited. Under-invoicing has gone down. Smuggling has gone down, but not necessarily because of the curtailment of hawala. The physical movement of goods has been curtailed as a result of COVID. A lot of crew and passengers that used to bring in stuff, that has gone down because travel has gone down. So overall, I would say that the negatives of grey list have already been factored in, and I don't think there are further negatives likely to come, but there will be a gradual progression of positives coming through.
A gradual progression of positives, and at the moment, even if we remain on the grey list, the positives are still there, given that we have enacted a number of laws. Dr. Aliya, your final thoughts? We have just a couple of minutes left. As much as we wanted to include Dr. Aliya, but I think the internet has just been extremely unreliable. But yes, final thoughts, Safiya.
Yes, I would just say, Amber, thank you for obviously including me in the program. My final thoughts would really be, I think it's in everybody, the global community's best interest and in Pakistan's best interest and the region's best interest for Pakistan to get off the grey list and to not be further, pushed towards any list, whether it be grey or black. I don't think that's anyone's intention or in anyone's best interest in the region, any country's best interest for Pakistan in terms of the trajectory of the financial and economic implications that those lists carry. So I do think that Pakistan is headed in the right direction with this legislation. I don't think it was an easy task internally, politically, to undertake, and so I think that the right steps are being taken. So we'll look to the future to see what more is being done on some of these longstanding issues. Thank you for including me, Amber.
Thank you so much, Safiya. And Kateryna, if you could have your final thoughts as well.
I think that it is very important to get out of the list, but getting off the list is not the end of the journey. It is just a way for a more effective AML CFT system in the country. But it's just the initial step to getting off the list.
The list perhaps is less important, the implementations. Jamal.
The list is just a short-term objective. And ultimately how we contribute in the long term would affect and improve our standing as a responsible state. And ultimately we should aim to one day also be a full member of the FATF as well. But I think what also needs to be done at this point is that whatever countries need to also acknowledge the positive measures which Pakistan has taken despite a very difficult political environment. And also if FATF has to maintain its integrity in such a system, efforts to politicize this forum should be discouraged at all costs, so that these mechanisms can also be used at some point in the future. Similar task forces and tools can be used for mechanisms such as health security or climate change and such things. So it's an interesting and fascinating evolution of international law.
Thank you so much for giving us time, Jamal, Safiya, Ehsan, Malik, Dr. Aliya, even though we couldn't speak to you as much as we wanted to, but thank you so much for joining in, and Kateryna as well. Really, in conclusion, Pakistan has made a great deal of progress, which the FATF acknowledged in its October plenary. And while there is still, as the FATF says, some serious deficiencies, it has been in Pakistan's interest to implement a number of the 27-point action plan. Finally, I think it's important where we keep thinking of it as a zero-sum game, where we need to be off the grey list and we don't want to be on the blacklist, and whose fault is it and what the conspiracy is and what the politics is. Really, it is in Pakistan's interest to fully implement this action plan. It's great for business, it's great for our international standing, and it is also just for the country as well, in terms of improving all our countering terrorism financing, which as well as money laundering. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.